Everyone in this story believed the dangerous person in that house was the maid. They were wrong, and it took a cracked ceiling at 3 in the morning for them to find out how wrong. 6 weeks earlier, Ngozi stood in the middle of the Adeyemi family's marble-floored living room, holding a small brass bowl she had every right to be holding, and said nothing while Kunle Adeyemi called her a thief in front of the staff. She could have explained in one sentence. She didn't. She picked up a bag holding 3 years of her life and walked out through a gate she'd opened every morning at 6 a.m. And she did not look back. Here is what the family did not know. That brass bowl had been filled with clean water every single Friday for 11 minutes for 3 straight years. A rite Ngozi's own grandmother had performed for this same family for 20 years before her. The night they threw her out, they didn't fire a housemaid. They fired the only person keeping something old and patient and already living on that land asleep. It took 6 weeks for them to understand what they'd actually done. This is that story, and the price of a promise a family taught themselves to forget.
You would think the most important room in a 3-story mansion would be the biggest one. In the Adeyemi compound, it was the smallest, a locked back room the family called the old store, and the only room in the house that had a rule attached to it instead of a key. The compound sat on one of the quietest streets in Ikoyi, behind gates Chief Bayo Adeyemi built 40 years ago, back when he was a young man with a failing trading business and a mother who told him openly it would collapse in the year. It did not collapse. Within 10 years, he owned 3 companies. Within 20, he was one of the wealthiest men in the state. And the story the family told at every wedding toast was always the same 3 words: hard work, discipline, blessing. That story was missing exactly one detail, and the cost of that missing detail is what this entire story is about. By the time the story begins, Chief Bayo was 79, his clarity coming and going like tide on a shoreline. His son Kule, 38, ran the businesses and increasingly the household. His daughter Yewande, 32, ran the family's social calendar and quietly decided what their father was and wasn't well enough to be told. Both of them had stopped listening to the old man years before the events of this story. And that habit, more than anything supernatural, is what nearly destroyed them. And there was Ngozi, 26, hired 3 years earlier as a housemaid, though watch closely because housemaid never covered what she actually did. Every Friday night, without fail, Ngozi let herself into the old store with her own key. She stayed exactly 11 minutes, not 10, not 15, 11. Then she locked it and went back to her duties as if nothing had happened. And in 3 years, not one member of that family ever asked her a single question about it. Because decades earlier, Chief Bayo made it a house rule. The back room is never disturbed, and whoever tends it is never questioned. A rule everyone followed, and a reason nobody remembered. Keep that combination in mind because that is exactly the kind of gap that things fall through.
The curse did not enter this house through a witch, an enemy, or a jealous rival. It entered through a renovation budget. That year, Kule decided to modernize the back wing, clear it, renovate it, rent it out.
dead space into income, the way he converted everything into income. He did not ask his father. Nobody asked Chief Bayo anything anymore. When the workers opened the old store for the first time in a generation, Kule expected junk. He found almost nothing. A small bare altar built into the back wall, worn smooth in places by decades of touch, and a low brass bowl that looked to his eyes old and possibly valuable. He told no one. He moved the bowl to a shelf in his study to await an appraiser next to items he planned to sell. Now, watch what that one decision actually did. Because Kule thought he moved an antique, what he actually moved was an anchor. That Friday night, Ngozi entered the room for her rite and found the bowl gone. And here is what she knew that the family didn't. Her late grandmother had served this same household 40 years earlier, in this same quiet role. The year before she died, she explained the bowl to Ngozi in careful, deliberate detail. A vessel kept filled with clean water and a small weekly offering for a presence her grandmother would only ever describe one way. The one who was already living on this land before the house was built on top of him. Ngozi also knew one more thing, the condition her grandmother repeated more than any other. The family must not be told directly. That was part of the arrangement. So when she found the bowl sitting, unwashed and empty, in Kule's study, she did the only thing the rules left her. She quietly carried it back toward the room herself, planning to restore it before Friday's rite came due. Kule found her crossing the compound with it at 9 p.m. He saw a maid carrying a valuable brass antique in the dark. She was holding the one object protecting his family. He fired her on the spot, and in doing so, removed the last person in that compound who knew what the bowl was for. Count the cost of that misunderstanding as this story goes on. It gets specific. You would expect a family that just fired a thief to feel safer. Watch what actually happened instead. Good riddance, said Yewande at dinner that evening. She was always strange, always disappearing into that room. I always wondered. Kunle agreed, already thinking about the appraiser. But at the head of the table, Chief Bayo set down his spoon, and for one moment, something moved behind his eyes that looked like the man who once out-negotiated every boardroom in Lagos. The room, he said. Who is tending the room? There's nothing in that room anymore, Papa. We're renovating it. The old man did not argue. He went very quiet and did not finish his dinner. His children read it as confusion. It was not confusion. It was a man realizing that the one thing he'd spent 40 years quietly paying for had just been cancelled by his own son, and that he no longer had the standing in his own house to explain why that mattered. Here's the timeline of what happened next. And notice how easy each piece was to dismiss on its own. Week 1, the security cameras began glitching every night between 2 and 3 a.m. Not randomly, exactly 40 minutes of static every night, then perfect function. Week 2, a smell of standing water, faint but persistent, in a house with no leak. Doors that had never needed locking twice were found standing open every morning. Any one of these is nothing. An electrical fault, a plumbing twerk, a forgetful staff member. That is exactly how a family with every resource in the world managed to explain away a warning that was repeating itself on schedule. Because the truth is, people don't ignore signs because the signs are small. They ignore them because seeing them would mean admitting the story they told about someone was wrong. And no one in that house was ready to be wrong about Ngozi yet. Here is what a family with unlimited money does when their house turns against them. They spend the money. And here is what this chapter will show you. Every naira of it was spent fixing the wrong problem. Kunle treated practical symptoms with practical solutions. An electrician for the cameras found nothing, charged fully. A plumber for the smell, no leak anywhere in the compound, charged a full inspection fee for a problem he couldn't diagnose. New locks twice on the strength of Kunle's private theory that a certain former staff member had kept a spare key. He never said her name. Everyone in the house knew who he meant. Yewande went a different way. Unsettled by things she couldn't explain to her fiancé's family without sounding unstable, she brought their pastor to bless the house. He walked every room with oil and scripture on a Sunday afternoon, prayed loudly and confidently over the back room without knowing one single fact about what had anchored it for 60 years, and left satisfied. Now mark what happened that same night, because this is the moment the house stopped whispering. Every clock in the compound, 6 of them, 6 different rooms, none connected to each other, stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. When Yewande, sleepless, walked past them near dawn, all 6 were ticking again, perfectly synchronized, as if they had simply been waiting for a witness. A blessing had been said over that room, and the response was not peace, it was punctuality. Meanwhile, Chief Bayo quietly moved himself out of the master bedroom into the small guest room by the stairs, the room closest, though neither of his children noticed the geography, to the back wing. When Kunle asked why, his father answered with a clarity that frightened him more than any confusion ever had. Because whatever is angry is angriest closest to the room, and I am the only one in this house who remembers why. That sentence was a door standing wide open. All either of his children had to do was ask one follow-up question. Neither did. They had spent so many years managing their father instead of listening to him that they could no longer tell the difference. And the price of that habit comes due in the very next chapter.
Everything you are about to hear happened inside 8 days. One family, 8 days. Count it. Day 1 through 3, Kunle lost the largest contract of his career. 18 months of work collapsed on a paperwork error that's so basic that his own partners began quietly asking whether he was still fit to lead. He hadn't slept properly in 10 days. He had also begun hearing and telling no one slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor above his office at night. The floor above his office is the roof. Day 4, Yewande's engagement ended. Her fiancé's family came to the compound for the formal introduction dinner. Every light in the dining room went out at once and stayed out for exactly 11 minutes. 11. The precise length of the Friday rite that no one in that family had ever known to time. The guests left early, shaken, and did not call again. Day 7. Chief Bayo gathered both children into the guest room with an urgency they hadn't seen in him in years, and began for the first time in 4 decades to tell the truth. About the land, about what was here before the house, about an arrangement he made as a desperate young man on terms he barely understood, about the woman's family, Ngozi's family, who had kept that arrangement peaceful for 2 generations while the Adeyemis built an empire on top of it, without ever once having to think about the cost. He got as far as 5 words before his hand went to his chest. The stroke took his speech at the exact moment he finally chose to use it. Whether you call it coincidence or collection is up to you. The family stopped debating the question that night. Day 8, 4 a.m., a hospital corridor. Kunle Adeyemi, the man who fired a maid without waiting 1 sentence for an explanation, sat utterly undone and asked his father's oldest driver a question that cost him more pride than any business loss that week. Do you know where Ngozi's family lives?
You've been waiting for the scene where Ngozi slams the door in his face. That scene is not coming. And the reason it's not coming is the entire point of this story. 3 days later, she opened her door to find Kule Adeyemi standing there unannounced, in clothes that looked slept in, asking, not demanding, for the first time in his adult life genuinely asking for 5 minutes. She let him in. She listened to it all. The 40 minutes of static, the standing water smell, the 6 synchronized clocks, the 11 dark minutes that ended his sister's engagement, his father's unfinished sentence in the guest room, and she watched something in his face finally break open as he said the words she had been forbidden to say to him for 3 years. My father says your grandmother made him a promise. I need to know what it was. So she told him. Everything the rules had kept locked behind her silence. What her grandmother explained the year before she died. What she herself had maintained every Friday for 3 years while his family walked past her like furniture. What it meant that the bowl had sat empty on his study shelf for 6 weeks, while a present her family had kept peaceful for 2 generations, went for the first time in 60 years, completely unattended. Kunle did not ask for proof. Understand why. He had spent 6 weeks watching every rational explanation fail on schedule. The evidence had already made her argument for her. What do we do, he asked, to fix it? And Ngozi gave him the one answer no amount of money had been able to buy from an electrician, a plumber, a locksmith, or a pastor. You don't fix a broken promise by paying someone to say a prayer over it once. You fix it by keeping it properly, together, not hidden in a back room like something shameful, the way your father hid it from you. Read that back. The curse was never the presence on the land. The curse was the secrecy, and the family had been carrying that one for 40 years. The following Friday, Ngozi walked back through the Adeyemi gate and clocked the difference in one detail. Last time she crossed that compound carrying the brass bowl, she was fired for it. This time, the family stood waiting for her to arrive. She restored the bowl, cleaned, filled, to its altar for the first time in 7 weeks. But she did not perform the rite alone. And this is the part that actually repaired things. She taught them. Kunle and Yewande standing in the small room their family had locked and forgotten. Learning what the weekly offering required and why. Learning that their entire family's peace had rested for 2 generations on a promise made by one desperate young man and kept faithfully without credit by women their family had never thought to properly see. Chief Bayo recovered slowly. When he regained enough clarity to be told that his children finally knew everything, he wept, not from grief, his children said afterward, but from the specific relief of an old man setting down a weight he had carried completely alone since he was young enough to believe he could carry anything alone. The result came in the same quiet way the warnings had. The cameras never glitched again, the clocks kept ordinary time, the smell of standing water never returned. And Ngozi was not simply rehired, the family made her formally and openly the keeper of the back room. Paid properly, named at family gatherings, her role written into the family's understanding of itself, instead of buried underneath it. The rule of the house changed from never ask about the room to something no one in that compound will ever need reminding of again. Never forget what the room is for. brass bowl across a dark compound? There is a photograph on Yewande's phone now of that same bowl, back on its altar, clean water catching the last light through the room's single high window. And beside it, a second photograph from the same afternoon, Ngozi in that room, no longer alone, Kunle on one side, Yewande on the other, and Chief Bayog Adeyemi himself walked in slowly on his son's arm, pressing his palm flat against the altar's worn stone and saying out loud for the first time in 40 years the words his own father once made him swear to keep silent. The family who called her a thief finally understands what she was actually carrying that night. Not something stolen, the only thing standing between them and the loss of everything they had built. Some debts are money, some are land, and some are simply this, a promise kept quietly by someone your family trained itself to not to see until the one day you finally have to. Do you believe a promise made 40 years ago can still be collecting on itself today, whether you remember making it or not? Because here's why I'm asking. Everything that happened to the Adeyemi family, the cracked ceiling, the stopped clocks, the collapsed engagement, traces back to 11 minutes a week, quietly kept that they never once thought to ask about. If you want to hear what Ngozi's grandmother actually promised Chief Bayog Adeyemi the year she first walked through that gate, and what it cost her to keep it for 20 years without telling a soul, that story is coming next, and it changes everything you thought you understood about this one. Comment yes if you believe an old promise can still reach into the present, or no if you think the Adeyemis just got unlucky. I want to see where this comment section lands. I'll see you in the next story.